Here. Rick Smith.
Here.
Howard Solomon.
Here.
Everybody could rise for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We start tonight with public participation and recognition. And this is an action item that the Board of Education accept with gratitude the donation of $20,231.81 in grants from the Dekalb Education Foundation. Do we have a motion?
So.
Roll call, please.
Fred Davis.
Yes.
Jeff Albrecht.
Yes.
Terry Malak.
Yes.
Victoria Newport.
Yes.
Valerie Penny-Hernandez.
Yes.
Rick Smith.
Yes.
Howard Solomon.
Yes.
With thanks. Thank you so much. It's considerable.
Next, we have the recognition of Dekalb High School art students. And the Board of Education and the Dekalb High School Art Department would like to recognize the achievements of Grace Burbeck, Darius Moore, and Maeve Wallace at the 2018 IHSAE Art Exhibitations in Chicago. Grace Burbeck is one of 20 Illinois high school artists chosen to have their artwork displayed around Chicago and the Illinois Capitol building for the next year. Darius Moore was awarded Best in Show Photography at the IHSAE General Exhibition. Maeve Wallace was awarded Best in Show at the IHSAE Senior Scholarship Exhibition. Congratulations to Grace, Darius, and Maeve on their outstanding achievements. Leslie, would you like to speak?
Sure. I wanted to share some of the works that they did real briefly. So IHSAE is a competition between over 125 high schools throughout Northern Illinois and Chicagoland. And so it was a highly competitive field in a large arena. And this is the photograph that Grace Burbeck created that will be on display in the Capitol down in Springfield and around Chicagoland for a year. And then Darius Moore created this photograph, and it was accepted at the general exhibition at the Zuby Art Center in Chicago for the IHSAE. And this was the one that was awarded Best in Show Photography. And
Back up. We
oh, I'm sorry.
Thank you. That's good. Thank you.
And Darius wasn't able to go to the ceremony, but I did get your trophy. And then a couple blocks away from that, at the IHSAE Senior Exhibition, this is the work that was selected by Maeve Wallace, and this is the one that got the top prize in the whole gallery that beat out all the drawings and paintings in the Senior Exhibition. So this is the Best in Show piece. So congratulations.
We could have Darius, Maeve, and Grace come up. We have certificates. The board would like to congratulate you.
Thanks so much. Good job. Thanks so much.
Can't you just leave those here?
Thank you. Very nicely done.
Somebody copy those and sell them, self-praise.
Well, We will have high school work on the walls here in the month of, you'll be able to see a lot of the high school.
That's really cool.
Next, we have public.
Thank you so much for your work.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, we have public comment. Members of the public who wish to speak to the board should complete a request card prior to the meeting. This section of the meeting will be reserved for comments from the public. All comments should be limited to 3 minutes, and criticism of individuals is not allowed. Okay, first we have Linda Kerr, and she would like to speak on substitute teacher pay increase.
Okay, now?
Yep.
Okay, all right, I've been substituting in the district for 22 years. And when I started subbing, I believe our pay was $55 a day. And then it went up to 85, and then around the year 2000, it was 100 for a couple of years. And it went down to 85, and it went up to 95. So it's been $95 a day for a number of years. And I think it's time for a raise. I know we have a hard time getting subs, and perhaps another digit there, a 3-figure digit, would attract more subs. I checked around the area, and this is not unreasonable to ask for 100 instead of 95. There are several days where we have to work, instead of doing the 5 or 6 classes, they put there in a shortage, and they have to put us in to as many classes as they can. We get a 25-minute lunch. So we work very hard, and I think we're very important. So I'm asking for a raise for us. I represent many of the subs in the district. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next, we have Herbert Rubin, and he would like to speak of out-of-district school students.
The study. Okay. Excuse me, I'm going to read this because it's the best way for me not to turn into an academic and talk forever. Okay. It's very simple. When the school board decided to authorize a study on the possibility of other district students attending our schools, many of us feared that such a study would exacerbate community tensions. Unfortunately, the implementation of the study has done precisely that. To many, the study seems like a frontal attack on the minority communities of the city. Now, a suggestion. To minimize further damage to the community, I strongly suggest that the school board, before releasing the results of the study, seek third-party expert advice, check the methodology used, and provide neutral interpretations of the statistical findings. I am sure there are experts in the university who would be willing to undertake the task. Using neutral outside experts to interpret the study would help restore the credibility of the school board and perhaps ease community tensions. Thank you.
Next, we have board committee reports and correspondence.
Just the Tyler Spring Sing. I happened to have attended that very recently. The kids were marvelous, and Jim Canis, music teacher over there, did a great job with them. Also attended the Diversity Plan Writing Committee at Tyler back in March. We had both of our consultants present for that, as well as Jimmy Huber, who kept the new meeting moving along, and we're starting to look at goals. I've been invited to a final diversity plan, and I believe that I will probably be seeing that for the first time around the 30th of the month. And Carrie made it to that one. Thank you, Carrie.
Yeah, anybody else?
Go ahead.
I'll speak about 2 things. The insurance committee met, and there is a vendor recommendation to bring forward for our new outfit that would handle that. And also yesterday, as Howard was kind of alluding to, the diversity planning committee met. I was there. It's only been the second time I've been there. Howard's been there more times. And they are well along. They have pretty much of an outline of the plan and have been discussing it both at this planning committee level, which is 6 to 8 people, I think, and also in the larger group, which I have not been to. You've been to that, right, Alex? Where ideas come from that larger group and are brought to the smaller group, which includes our consultants, Dr. Adams and Dr. Cullen. So it's moving along. There's more work yet to be done, but I think they are making progress, and the board should soon be able to see some of the results of what they've come up with so far.
I just want to remind everybody that our next board meeting is on May 1st, and we will be having that meeting at the high school. And an hour prior to the meeting at 6 to 7, we will have a cake and punch to honor our awards, retirement and 20-year. So please come and join us from 6 to 7 and honor these individuals.
Hey, Carrie, did you want to talk about the insurance?
Well, yeah, I could expand, but I don't know that we need to. Jamie, we've got.
Sarah's gonna.
Yeah, Sarah will go into it further, so let's let her do it.
Thank you.
Next, we have presentations, City of DeKalb TIF presentation, and this is an information line.
That's for me to stay back here. Hi everybody, my name is Jason Michnick. I'm the Economic Development Planner for the City of DeKalb. I'm also the city's TIF administrator. For those of you that don't know what TIF is, it stands for Tax Increment Financing. It's a very powerful economic development tool that the city has used recently over the last year or so to spur some investment in the downtown. If you've seen the recent construction, the Cornerstone, Sundog, and Plaza projects in between 1st and 3rd Street on Lincoln Highway, all three of those projects did receive some sort of TIF incentive from the city to make those projects possible. And so I wanted to take you through a timeline. Also wanted to provide you with an update. The city is considering creating a new central business district TIF, which would involve taking out some of the existing parcels in the central area TIF and re-TIFing them. So to go back in time, in September of last year, staff presented our council with kind of a summary of the existing TIF districts, looking at some of the historical trends, and looking at the last couple of years, because the two TIF districts that the city currently has are coming to an expiration, one of them at the end of this year, and then another one at the end of 2021. At that point, the staff did recommend investigating the creation of a new downtown TIF district. Council requested that we go back and get some input from our Economic Development Commission and our Finance Advisory Commission, both of which did recommend that we at least go forward and investigate the eligibility. So in December, the city contracted with a TIF specialist, SP Friedman, to conduct that eligibility study for us. And then also in January, we went back again because a couple of questions had come up when we started talking about a new TIF district, specifically how had the city used TIF funds historically, what had been some of our successes, and what are some of the failures that the city has seen with the use of TIF funds. So I'll step through some information that was taken from the September 19th and then also the January 22nd. And then just to give you guys a quick update on the eligibility study, we did anticipate, we were hoping that the eligibility report and redevelopment report were going to be available in April due to some delays with data collection and also potential boundary changes to what was originally proposed. Are delaying that, and we're now thinking that it's probably going to be May or June before the final eligibility study and report will be filed for the public to view. And if the city and JRB were to recommend, and the city did adopt the designation of that, that would likely happen in August if that was to occur. So first, I wanted to give you guys a look back in history and how the city has used TIF funds historically. One of our TIF districts, the central area, is 30 years old. So going back in history and getting very detailed figures and numbers was somewhat challenging, but we were able to kind of aggregate everything into some general categories. The largest category by expenditure was debt service. So the city did issue some bonds throughout the life of the TIF district to pay for larger projects that we didn't actually have cash on hand to fund.
But when you account for the bond proceeds and the note proceeds that we get, which is about $30 million, we pay about $7 million in interest over the last 30 years. The second highest category for expenditure using TIF dollars is actually distribution to other taxing districts. So when the Central Area TIF District was extended in 2008, there was an intergovernmental agreement that was passed that stipulates that half of the revenue from that district, which is between $6 and $7 million a year, half of that gets declared surplus. It goes through a calculation and then gets distributed back out to the taxing districts. However, prior to that 2008 IGA, the city had separate agreements over time where they had funded different projects to other taxing bodies. There was a 1997 make-whole agreement at one point to look at the funds, but in total, the second highest category by expenditure was distributions. That next category, right around the same, 26 million, other capital improvements. This is kind of where I get into the challenges of finding the nuances of which projects were which. This is largely infrastructure projects and some private development projects. And parsing that was a little bit different because of how accounting was done for a number of years, where specific projects that didn't need a specific line item were put into this other category. After that, infrastructure and city facilities was the next highest expenditure. And then internal transfers and city surplus. So taking the funds that are declared surplus, we pulled out what the city's portion of that is, but the city also takes some TIF funding and transfers that directly into our general fund. Per state statute, the city is allowed to transfer to cover the administrative costs of the TIF district. I would argue, though, that historically the city has over-subsidized our internal transfers to the general fund using TIF. That's why that number is specifically so large. And then you get down to the private property rehab and incentives. When you look at the use of TIF and what it's meant for, this is really where the largest bulk share of the TIF funds should have been going towards, was looking at spurring redevelopment. The idea of TIF is that you go into an area that can't support incentive and economic development in the traditional sense. There are several factors that could lead to that. And TIF is really supposed to help kind of level the playing field. So an example of the Cornerstone project in downtown that's on First and Lincoln Highway, you had a property that was extremely blighted and deteriorated, was about ready to fall in on itself. And the cost of acquiring that building, remediating all the asbestos and mold in it, tearing it down, turning it back into a clean slate for a developer to come in and do something new, based on the rents that you can get in the downtown for commercial and residential, that deal didn't make sense. There was a $3 million plus gap in terms of an investor that would come in and look at that project. Just didn't make sense. So that's really where TIF is supposed to come in. But in the long run, when you look at that over a 30-year period, millions of dollars in property tax and sales tax are going to be generated from that project. So you have to look at the kind of the long-term and benefit of providing some of these incentives and what it means to the tax base in general over a long period of time. So land acquisition and then contractual services were the next lowest categories. To get into a little bit more detail in terms of the funds that were distributed to other taxing districts, these figures on the left, this chart is only for 2000 through 2017. The state started requiring annual reports for TIF in 2000, which were very detailed. So these were where I was able to get actual dollar figures that were distributed to all the taxing districts. In that first annual report, though, it did state in a summary page that 5.7 million prior to 2000 had been distributed to the other taxing districts. Though I wasn't able to go back in our oldest records in our archives to find out exactly what those dollar figures are. So looking at that, so the school district lion's share, if you look at a pro rata share of the tax bill, it would be the school district. So when we do distribute those surplus, the school district does benefit the most from that. So $26.5 million is what you got over that 17-year period. I also did not include the $2 million that was provided for capital for Founders and Clinton Rosette. So that would be about 28.5. And again, I don't know what that 5.7 what the school district got before 2000. So in total, about $50 million has been distributed to the other taxing districts out of out of the 2 TIF districts. So looking forward and trying to figure out what we were going to do with the remainder, coming up with a plan for how we were going to use the rest of our TIF funds through the end of these 2 TIF districts. We needed to figure out exactly how much money we had. So I looked at kind of our historical revenue trends, which are those solid lines, and did 2 different methodologies, kind of come up in a higher and a lower range for what we thought the revenues were going to be. So the higher range, I used a linear regression model over the entire history of the TIF to come up with that trend line. And then the lower one, if you kind of see how there's a very linear growth up until about 2006 in the TIF districts, and you see this big arch. I looked at a more short range for the second one and averaged the annual growth over that to come up with the lower range for the revenues. And then we also looked at our expenses. If you go to the next slide, please. So these are our expenditure assumptions that went into this. So contractual services that are and reoccurring, these are just things that we typically budget for on an annual basis. We don't necessarily always use these funds. It kind of depends on the projects that we look at. So on average, I looked at the historical amounts that we did budget annually. Over the last 10 years, we usually spent about half of that. So, but just to be conservative, we did look at the annual budget amounts. And then in the capital expense side, we do have the phase 2 incentives for both the Cornerstone and Plaza project, which is about $2.5 million. The city has historically provided $100,000 in capital expenses to the Egyptian Theater to keep that building maintained. 5 years left in the TIF district, that's another $500,000. The city was looking at a 5th Street streetscape project to do some traffic calming at the intersection with the new strip center that was built there at 5th. That project is likely not going to go forward because the traffic study didn't result in as much traffic increases as we thought when that development went through. So that may be another $500,000 that we gain. That doesn't go forward. Similarly, the Egyptian Theater of Our City Manor, which is a senior living facility over on 1st Street that the city owns. We do help out with capital for that building. The city also uses TIF funds to do street reconstruction and repair. Annually, that's been about $500,000 in each TIF district. So looking at the remaining years, that's $3.5 million. Other capital improvement projects that we have planned for the downtown, things like Wi-Fi, security cameras are included in there. I did look historically over the last 10 years what we transferred to our general fund and just assumed conservatively that would stay the same. That was about $3.6 million. And then from the 2010 bond series to do the downtown streetscapes, we have about $4.7 million left. And then the surplus distribution is calculated again based on your revenues. So putting those two together on the next slide, we looked at the annual fund balance. So these are our revenue and expense projections for both TIF districts. So taking all those expenses out, we have approximately somewhere between 12 and a little under $14.5 million that we can put towards projects. And then we kind of talked about what we wanted to do. So next slide, please. At that time, we talked about there's 3 options that we presented with council. The first option was we could prioritize the remaining funds that we had at 12 to 14.5 and the projects that we had identified at the time. The second was that we could increase the available funds through policy changes. So reducing the amount of TIF that we're spending on roads, reducing the amount that we're transferring to our general fund, trying to pick up a couple extra $1 million that we could actually put towards projects that were, again, going to increase the tax base and the amount of property tax revenue that can be generated over time. And then the last option was to investigate the creation of a new downtown TIF district. So looking at potentially how we were going to draw a border, we did some research and we looked at each individual parcel and how that EAV had performed over time. So what you're looking at here is a map, and parcels that are purple and parcels that are red are actually properties that are assessed at a value lower today than they were 30 years ago when the TIF district was created, which is pretty remarkable because just with general inflation, you would think that the value of property would have increased over a 30-year period. But that's not what we're seeing here. Then those green parcels, we looked at what our highest performing parcels were, see if we could learn any lessons from what successful projects are. So as an example, if you look at that cluster of green over there on the right above the railroad tracks, that was one of the first projects that the city ever did. It's called the Wurlitzer Industrial Park. and it was just a bunch of scrub land that was vacant, and they built out some infrastructure, brought in some industrial businesses. So taking a very low value property and then and developing that into something that's worth more is really how you create a successful TIF. So what we did is we tried to draw a line around all those purple parcels that are the commercial properties that are upside down. Another thing that I like to point out in the idea of taking low value properties and redeveloping them is if you look where the Cornerstone project is, kind of hard to see where First and Lincoln Highway is on the southeast corner. You have a little cluster of purple right there. That's the Cornerstone project. So we identified a cluster of very low value properties and targeted those for redevelopment. Same thing with Plaza on the northeast corner of 2nd and Lincoln Highway, another cluster of purple. So that's how we started approaching the TIF and trying to create the largest return on investment that we could with TIF dollars. If you go to the next slide, we kind of try to draw an outline around those purple parcels to capture those low value properties, the ones that are now what we'd say is underwater, assessed lower than they were 30 years ago. That's kind of where we got the first draft boundary. And just so you can kind of see where our minds were. If you want to go to the next slide, this is the actual boundary that was submitted for consideration when we did the eligibility study. So we did remove some of that. The Elwood Historic neighborhood was removed from that. Some of the parcels on the west side of First and south of the tracks were removed. And then some of the parcels in between Oak and Pine on the very north side were also removed. And we're also, I assume that if we are going to move forward, that this footprint of this TIF is going to reduce somewhat more. We're trying to figure out one of the ideas and why we wanted to look at the downtown and why the timing There's two reasons the timing right now we thought was really good. One, the state is considering some pretty substantial TIF changes to the TIF Act. One of them being that we wouldn't be able to potentially re-TIF. If a parcel was in an existing TIF prior, there was some legislation that was introduced that said you couldn't put it back into another TIF for a 15-year period. And given the condition of a lot of the buildings in the downtown, we thought that was a risk. So that was one of the reasons that was motivated us to look at the TIF right now. The second one was with the Cornerstone and the Plaza projects under construction right now. If we were to create the new TIF district with those two projects in there, that would seed fund the increment into the new TIF district. So usually when you create a new TIF district, you don't have any development there going on. You have to wait sometimes 5-10 years for that increment to even be generated in an amount that would be substantial enough for you to actually incentivize projects. Or an alternative is some communities would go out and they'll issue massive bonds to cover projects, and then they use the increment to pay those bonds over time. Right now, the city's ability to issue debt is not very good, so that wasn't really an option for us, which is really why we were looking at trying to include those two recent projects in the new TIF to get the ball rolling. Another option too is that we do have some fund balance in one of the TIFs that we would be able to port into the new TIF to seed fund some projects at the front end, again, to generate some increment.
Jason, can I ask a question?
Sure.
So in TIF 2, we currently have, what's the projected increment that's going to be remaining in TIF 2?
That would depend on whether or not we ported it. If we were to do nothing at this point, I think we can go back a couple of slides to the available balance.
Is it 12 or 14, something like that?
No, that's the total amount. So just in TIF 2, I believe if we didn't do anything, it's about 10 million.
Okay.
So yeah, about 10.1 to 10.3.
Now, correct me, but one of the two TIFs has a sales tax component as well, correct?
That is correct. Yeah, the central area TIF, which is the one that generates more on an annual basis. That's also the one where the surplus is declared out of. That was a very unique TIF. There was about a 2-year period in the late 80s where the state created something called a sales tax TIF, where you could also collect increment on sales tax. They reverted back on that, the state did, and then also asked for municipalities to pay those funds back. So there was a period when we started declaring surplus that we had to send a portion of that back. That's based on, it's a kind of a complicated calculation, but it's based on the total amount of sales tax that was generated through SROT compared to the total amount of increment that's been generated. And you take that percentage and apply it to whatever the surplus distributed for that is, and that's the amount. But it's about $500,000 a year that gets sent to the state. I want to say it's a little bit less than that.
So is the consideration to roll that $10 million into the central TIF or to the new TIF?
That would depend on whether or not the new TIF gets support from council and goes forward. If we are to port, you can't just port for the sake of porting. You have to actually have projects identified that those funds would be going towards. And those projects also, you have to show that they would benefit the TIF that they were coming out of. So we would, before the expiration of TIF 2, have to designate and identify projects that we were going to do in the central area TIF or the new TIF, and then say that this type of project would benefit the TIF that's coming out to you. So an example being, you're taking a blighted property on the edge of downtown and you're renovating that into a higher use. The idea that you'd have some sort of new development that benefits the property values of the surrounding area would be an example of a project that you would be able to support through transfer.
So, but if you transfer the increment fund balance at the end of TIF 2 into the central TIF, would the sales tax still apply? So would some of that still go to the state, some still go to the city?
No, I don't know. From my understanding, it would not, because the way that the IGA and the surplus calculation is based off of the property tax increment that's generated solely out of the central area TIF.
My last question, is there consideration of taking that increment and redistributing it out to the rest of the taxing bodies?
We have not discussed that at this point. Our viewpoint from city staff's perspective is that if we have projects that are going to benefit the community, a better use of that would be to invest it and leverage private investment. So if we have projects and we're providing a 25% incentive on that project, and you look at $10 million, that's a hefty amount of investment that we can focus into downtown if we were to do that.
And especially given the fact that the city is not, nor are we in a position to issue bonds.
Correct.
Okay.
I have a quick question. It's nowhere near as intelligent as you. But I see something different on this that I haven't seen before or even considered. What's all that property between the police station and the river on the south side of Lincoln? What, you got something proposed for that?
Yeah, so
that's a really unusual little addition.
Sure. So the reason that was added, our Economic Development Commission last year looked at our strategic plan and looked at prioritizing things that were in the strategic plan. And one of the things that rose to the very top was a physical connection between the downtown and NIU campus. So we would be looking at redeveloping the area between downtown, making that physical connection, and also doing a substantial streetscape project called Complete Streets, where we'll be adding potentially more pedestrian-friendly, bike-friendly infrastructure.
Not interfering with the residences that are there or removing the residents? What would you be? I mean, it just seems it's all residential in there. It's all.
No, at this point, we wouldn't consider redevelopment of those residential properties.
Good. I was just wondering. Thanks so much.
No, but if you're familiar with that area, really kind of between First, on the south side of Lincoln Highway, between First and the river, we see is really, there's a lot of vacant land there. There's
very little from the river to the police station.
And when I said the footprint of this is potentially going to change, I think that may be part of it.
Yeah. Okay, thank you so much.
Mr. Missioner, you've discussed a 30-year history of TIFs in Dekalb.
Mm-hmm.
And over 30 years, we've reached a point where if I walked around in downtown Dekalb with a pocket full of $100 bills, I'd walk home with a pocket full of $100 bills. There is no place where people walk in the door and spend money. Are we doing better? And if we're not doing better, how come we should use the same tool that's got us into this position in the first place?
Sure, it's a really good question. I think one of the issues, specifically with the central area TIF, is how massive it is. So if you actually look at that, and I apologize, I don't have a full map of the TIF district, but it goes all the way up to Sycamore Road. And if you look at the history of how TIF was used, a lot of the private projects that were supported were on Sycamore Road. Almost all of them got some sort of incentive. I think that was just kind of the trend that was going on in terms of development in the 80s and the 90s and the 2000s, was the commercial, the big box retail, chasing sales tax dollars. things have changed dramatically. With the rise of online retail, you're not going to see many big box stores proliferate like they did in the 90s and early 2000s. And there's a resurgence of a lot of communities looking at bringing that back down to the downtown and investing into their downtowns and trying to create what's called experiential retail. So it's a lot less just stores and a lot more restaurants, entertainment venues to go along with that retail shopping and trying to create something unique, bringing in more boutique shops. I think saying that it wasn't the TIF wasn't necessarily successful, I don't think it's because of that. I think it was just following what the development trends at the time were, and because of how large the central area TIF was, they were able to kind of, I want to say, subsidize the development of Sycamore Road and ignore downtown. An example I always like to point out is Vegas. They built the Strip and ignored downtown Vegas, and look what they're doing now.
So in other words, the downtown wasn't a priority when they, in that TIF, it was up Sycamore Road. And now their communities are looking to develop that third place. So we have homework and the home work, and then that third place being your downtown, your boutiques, your places to go eat.
So just in general, I mean, I get the downtown as being a priority. Do you find that the railroad track, this location, is that a real hindrance in the downtown revitalization effort?
Yeah, as a planner, it's challenging to work around the tracks. Our downtown is bisected. I'm sure a lot of people have heard that we have one of the only places in the country where you have two state highways that intersect with a railroad track. So it's unique. It's very challenging, but I don't think that we can't work around that. I think you just have to look at thinking a little more differently, expanding the core, not looking just at the first and fourth core, but planning what can you do north of the tracks and what can you do south of the tracks. It's a little bit different to create kind of some different pockets of different things.
I see that's a challenge.
As you work with a TIF, there's usually a period of forbearance on the part of other taxing bodies. And that means that effectively the other taxing bodies accept that their tax base will stay what it is, while some more of the additional taxes generated in the new TIF area are used to build that TIF. How long a period of forbearance would you expect from the school district? And how much is going to come of having agreed to forbear on collecting additional taxes?
It's a good question. I mean, at this point, you're looking at a TIF, it would be 23 years of life, but I think moving forward and how to avoid some of the mistakes that were made in the past, if you have a very clear vision of what you want to accomplish, it doesn't have to be 23 years. There's a very successful TIF example and case study that was done in Rosemont, where they knew exactly what they wanted to do. They started the TIF district. They issued bonds in the front half. It only took it took 2 years for them to pay those bonds from the income that was generated from those developments. And then as soon as it was done, those bonds were paid off. They shut the TIFs down. Because we don't have the ability to bond, we can't necessarily take that approach. I think if we were to get support from the school board moving forward, I think what we need to do is have an idea in place of how do we avoid some of the mistakes that were made in the past. How do we make sure that it's getting invested back into those developments?
And do we have that idea in place?
That would be part of the redevelopment plan that we were looking at. There's an eligibility study, and we want to have a vision in mind of what we're trying to accomplish. There's a lot of work that needs to be done in the downtown. It's going to take millions and millions of dollars just to bring up the buildings that are there currently up to code. I think a really good example, if you look at the Sundog project, that building, it had good bones, but they still put $1 million into that building. That's what it took to bring it up to what it currently is. And recently we had to condemn another building because some issues that we found inside it. And just the structure alone, the owner is estimating is going to cost $100,000 for them just to fix. That's before you get to all the other issues that are there potentially. So I don't have a good answer for you. I'm sorry.
My last question, at the beginning, you said the feasibility study, initially I know it was supposed to be done a little earlier, and now we're looking at June-ish, is that what you said?
Late May, early June.
Okay. So at that point, we'll be coming back together and looking at the feasibility study and.
Yeah, at that point, we would also be, the city has to pass an ordinance that sets the joint review board date. So there would be the joint review board in the future that we'd be able to actually talk about whether or not there would be support. That's where the school district and all the other taxing bodies are able to actually vote to recommend to the city whether or not to move forward. Likely prior to that too, we'll also have this, depending on the timing, we might be able to do all the joint review boards for the annual reports and that at once, but we may have 2 opportunities to talk about this since we may have 2 joint review boards.
So we'll have time to talk about this in detail further and work potential intergovernmental agreement.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Next, we have the Title I district-wide plan for grades K through 8. This is Dr. Jenny Cooper and Dr. Vicki Tuskin and Ms. Kimberly Wyatt.
Good evening. So we were before you in September asking for your approval of the district-wide Title I plan, and the state of Illinois has made it possible for us to once again submit our Title I plan. Once that has been approved by the state, then we can write our ESSA plan. And so we don't need it. So you have our plan that we are going to ask you to take action on at the May 1st meeting, and Kim's going to speak to the elementary piece, and then Vicki will speak to the secondary piece.
Some of the things that the Title I plan supports for elementary would be reading specialists in every building and literacy assistants. And then we also have to support the at-risk students. And then we also have an ELL teacher that goes between the buildings that don't have the programming to support those students. Another big piece of the grant helps pay for the intervention materials that we are using for literacy, and then a huge part helps pay for instructional materials. Also, for our instructional coaches, the grant supports them and some of our lead teachers to provide professional development. Sometimes that's during the day, sometimes that's after school or before school. Data teams is another big part of the grant. Each building has data teams 3 times a year, and actually 4 times a year. Then that pays for all of the members to attend and to have subs and to hold those meetings. And another big piece that we are moving towards now is social emotional supports. We have purchased books for different buildings to read, purchasing a consultant's time to help us with that. So those are some of the things that the grant covers for elementary.
Thank you. And as we've shared with you through various presentations, at the secondary level, as we've described in the past, Title I was previously just that federal money was just K through 5. Secondary, we've been in a process, and it's taken us almost 2 years of moving first to targeted assistance, which means what intervention that we did put in place was specifically for students who are most at risk in terms of academic achievement. It was very targeted, it was very limited in scope. Since then, a combination of doing a comprehensive needs assessment as well as piloting different assessments and convening together a Title I math team group. We are now moving into what now we call school-wide, which is what the elementary teachers, the elementary schools are also at. We're not looking with nearly as big of a budget because it's the same pot of money. The pot of money hasn't grown. We're in the process of reallocating some of the money that was for elementary exclusively to secondary. The math team specifically worked very hard at examining math data to better identify students who are most at risk. They oversaw the vetting out of intervention programs. The group has determined basically through the work of the team, along working with their building principals, that for the 2018-2019 BuzzMath will be
the support that actually all teachers, because we'll be school-wide, will have all math teachers will have access to. And then the creation of a math interventionist and due to reallocation, and which you have all approved, 2 math interventionists, and they will provide ongoing support both in pushing in to the math block, as well as working with students who are really behind in skills and assisted studies type setup. And those students will be identified through the math data team process. Very excited about it.
Then at the May 1st meeting, we are hoping that you will take action on approving the district-wide plan so that it can be submitted by the end of the week. There will be approximately a 30-day wait while the state reads, accepts our plan, and then the SF application will be released.
And in my experience, they don't always approve it the first time, our title plans. Sometimes we have to go back and make subtle
Sometimes we have to
revisions.
make adjustments. Last time, they approved it first time.
Wow, that's impressive.
I do have a question. So, and this is a question that just came about. When it says on your PowerPoint, examine math data to better identify students most at risk and best instructional practices. Now, I feel like math data to this point has only been used to a certain degree. Now, math in general can only be as good as we let it be, right? So it looks really different for our ELL learners. It looks very different for our special ed. And it looks very different for, general ed education students. So my question is, it's not specific here, but what other additional things do you intend to do to examine how to best use that math data?
So I hear 2 questions, and it has to do with one, how are we examining that math data through what you're describing, multiple lenses? And that process you're describing is what happens at the middle school level through our Tier 2, Tier 3 data team meetings. Those happen shortly after the math benchmarks. Those are led by our building principals, building sites. Our L teachers at Huntley are also present, as well as our resource teachers at all the grade levels. So we look at that math data in terms of determining, and when I say Tier 2, Tier 3, we're talking about additional support outside of the classroom. And so we have a system in place, and we're actually in year 2 of doing it this way. The school sites ahead of time at both buildings go in, and they pull from that benchmarked math data, they pull all students that fall below that 40th percentile with math. Then they create a spreadsheet of those students, and then they create these columns and identify what students are getting what supports in place already. So do they have an IEP? So are they getting assisted study hall? Are they already getting instructional supports through the L program at Huntley? Are they receiving STEP support, which is the social emotional piece at both middle schools? So are they already enrolled in Read 180 as a reading intervention? In that whole spreadsheet, there's nothing inherently specifically in there in terms of math support unless they have an IEP or they've structured or scaffolded instruction for math for L's in their assisted studies. So what will happen for next year when we're having our Tier 2, Tier 3 data team meetings, that added column will be added in terms of, do these students, when looking particularly at math data, do these students need additional support? And those students would be the most critical. If they're not already slotted in for other supports, they would be candidates for, during that encore period, for additional math support. We're actually going to start working on this in May, working with building principals and our instructional coaches, looking at trends in terms of groups of students, in terms of how they're scheduled. So say the resource teams at the middle school, do we need to make sure that maybe, and we haven't nailed this for sure yet, so I'm just talking hypothetically, but do we need to use our math interventionists in the most effective way? Do we need to have them next year pushing into sections where our resource teachers are? So we have that extra support. Do we need them pushing in with the teams that are supporting ELF. That will be part of the whole overall plan, but it really starts with those data teams that we have at the end of each one of our benchmarks. So there's multiple pieces already in place. And then, of course, the teachers are present at those data teams, and they're bringing their classroom data in terms of how they're performing within those formative and summative assessments within their curriculum.
One last question.
Sure.
So we've identified obviously how we're going to use that data for multiple groups.
Mhm.
But my question to you is, what do we do with students who have reached that growth, because it's math growth now?
Mhm.
And when we assess growth, we don't see this significant growth, but when we do, what system is in place when we do see additional? So in other words, what do we do for students who show a significant amount of growth in that year to ensure that we are challenging them enough and using that data to really challenge the students? Because I mean, we could talk about all the supports we give for the students who aren't, but what about the students who really are? Well, what are we doing to push to ensure that they are being challenged enough?
Are you speaking to in terms of within the regular or advanced math?
And I'm speaking in general, so yes, some might be in general, in regular, but some may be in advanced.
Mm-hmm. So that also comes into play in terms of our placement criteria, which let's say, for example, let's say we have a 6th grader who's moving to 7th grade. They are in regular or advanced math, either or. And so, Amy Luckler was here, I would have her also speak.
And sorry that I just asked.
No, this is all part and parcel of the bigger picture. And quite frankly, we're so excited to have some additional Title I funds, because this is going to give us some latitude. Because with school-wide, it doesn't have to be so much targeted anymore. School-wide means school-wide. So as we reallocate funds, I hear where you're going. You're looking to, are we only going to use Title I to just support the struggling students? Are we down the road going to be able to utilize Title I funds to also support
and supplement?
At this juncture, no, because we're reallocating very slowly. Because keep in mind, the pot of money is still the same pot of money. And what we don't want to do is negatively impact the programs and the positions that are already in place at the elementary. So we're not looking at this juncture to operate Title I at middle school at this juncture at the level of support that you see at elementary. But as we move school-wide, and this is the great thing about ESSA, is we can look at, through our needs assessment, right now we've targeted math, because at the middle school we have nothing really in place for math. Well, we can also, based on our needs assessment, we can start moving into more social emotional. We could look at possibly not just supporting their struggling students, but what are we doing in terms of supplementing our really advanced students. We could start to look, ESSA allows us to look at multiple pieces, but at this juncture, we've been very slow. It's taken us 2 years to get to this point. Very careful and prudent, that as we expand, that we are not impacting negatively things that have been in place with elementary that are key to supporting the programs that they have.
And the tricky thing with Title I really pushes Title I dollars to work towards students that are not performing and are struggling. But you can start to go down that with ESSA now, which is kind of exciting.
Yeah, and I feel like ESSA kind of promotes a little bit of looking more ahead down the line. So that's why I asked that question.
No, yeah, great question.
And so I'm sorry that I should have told Jamie about this before, but just.
No, those are good questions. And we have actually an ESSA retreat coming up. And within the very near future, we'll have an ESSA program for the board and community, and start talking about the ESSA plan, the new measures, the new framework, and what that is going to look like and mean to our district.
Question. So the next meeting, we are approving, this is informational, next meeting, we are approving your basic allocations, what are we approving?
You're approving the plan that we wrote. And then once that's approved by the state, then they will release the application for ESSA, which then gets into the actual dollars. But
Well, I guess I wasn't being clear. we are approving of the plan, which is the prioritizing or the informational aspect of what you just came up.
Yes.
Right. I commend you for, it was very instructive, it was very thorough. I know that you have to prepare for them to be thorough, but it was also incredibly thorough, very informational for me. And I thought it was very well composed, so. So that's what we're gonna be doing next week. And then it's gonna go to the state.
Other questions?
Yeah, once you get the funds, providing we make the application and it goes through the first time if we're so lucky, how long does the funding last? I mean, is there a drop dead date that goes year-to-year renewal, or how does that part
It's a
work?
year-to-year process, Carrie, and we can carry over a certain amount, but it's a year-to-year application that we have to do.
And then they look at our percentage of free and reduced lunch to determine
That's-
whether it's targeted or across the whole district.
We crossed that threshold.
Yeah, I know, but I'm saying, and I guess this is why I asked the first part of the question. Suppose I don't think this is gonna happen, but suppose we were to drop back below, is it 50%, 40%? What is it? 40?
40, yeah.
We're not gonna drop below
Yeah.
40.
We know that. We
So
are
there's no
decreasing a
point-
little because it goes on based on the census, but not a
Right.
lot.
Yeah.
But even if we did, let's say hypothetically, we dipped below 40, there's a window that the state's gonna look at.
That's what I was wondering.
And, because we got into this in my previous district, we were always right at that 40 threshold. And when we finally went from a targeted to a school-wide, even if because I asked that same question, what happens if we drop to 37 and we stick there for 2 or 3 years? And they said, once you're school-wide, you're school-wide.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Well, that makes it easier.
That is.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, ladies.
Yep. Next, we have holiday parties proposal.
No, we got the other.
Oh,
Was that covered?
No.
oh, I'm sorry.
This part, we
My mistake.
School-wide,
I did ask you.
She asked me, and I said, no, I think we're good to go. I'm just excited to get my part.
Sorry, go ahead.
So, each year I come around this time, normally by myself, but now Vicki's here because she's going to go school-wide with the middle schools. So each elementary building puts together a, school-wide plan. This year we went a little bit different, direction in elementary. We started by writing SMART goals about literacy, math, social, emotional, parent, communication, and working with parents, writing goals in each building. Then we attach those, and so when you see the 8 plans that we have, every building is going to be a little bit different because the form itself looks the same, but what's in there is going to be different. And then they go through as a team in the Rising Star team, and they determine how they're going to meet those goals. And that's the information that they put in here about PBIS, about counseling, about mentoring programs, our tier-wide school model, and then professional development that we offer to our teachers and paraprofessionals. And then the last piece will be at the end of the year. We will do a needs assessment in each building to prepare for the fall. And so we annually have to come forward, ask you to approve these plans before we can submit the big plan that we were just talking about. And then in the fall, and even maybe a little bit in May, the buildings will edit these plans that are in there again and change them according to the data that they have, and what parts they were able to get done this year and what parts they're going to finish up next year. And so that's why they all look a little bit different, but have a lot of the same components.
At the middle school level, the process is very different because, again, we are just now transitioning from targeted to school-wide, and we're still very focused on supporting math. In addition, because our scope in terms of the dollars that we'll be spending is much more limited, we're just strictly focused on math. The input from the Title I math team, which is made up of middle school math teachers, input from the 2 middle school principals, helped construct what you're going to see. And when you look at them, they're identical because the services that we're providing to the 2 middle schools are identical. As we work through this first year, particularly working with our 2 math interventionists, then at that point, we'll be able to really be much more specific in terms of what's being put in place, how we implement it, and then how we're going to adjust and change that based on the input from our teachers. There's a parent piece that also comes into play when we're building these plans, as well as looking at the data, both classroom data as well as our map data. And then that process then will be gradually shifted to the buildings themselves. But at this early stage, it's really being overseen by myself along with the building principals and our Title I math committee. So when you look at those two, for Clinton, Rosette, and Huntley, they're identical. Because in essence, what we're rolling out for next year for our first year school-wide is going to be identical to both of them.
Very much.
Thank you. Okay, now it's your turn.
Now it's my turn.
Holiday parties proposal.
All right. Obviously, this started before my arrival, and we had some discussion in the fall at some different meetings. And so below are my recommendations for our holiday parties and seasonal recognitions. Knowing that our students have the great opportunity to be living in a multicultural community, recognizing all the various cultural celebrations is consistent with really our purpose of even writing a social justice plan and having our students and their customs and their traditions being present in our curriculums. If we talked about that and we heard the presenters, that was one of the items that they came forward and said we need students recognize that they're not being seen in our materials. So my recommendation is, one, that we continue the PBIS seasonal celebrations. It was in my own observation and talking to building principals and other people who attended that our students totally embrace these and they enjoy them. They are all-inclusive and non-secular. Holiday themes were present at many of these. I mean, they coincide around Halloween, although we're not focusing on Halloween. They coincide around Valentine's Day and the winter celebrations, but that isn't the focus. But nonetheless, holiday themes were kind of present anyway. And we certainly encourage the PTA, PTO groups to organize specific holiday events if they choose and after hours. Number two, that we continue to promote traditional symbols in our buildings. And by that, I mean bringing traditional symbols back to our schools, including but not limited to Christmas trees, menorahs, Kwanzaa ritual visuals, poinsettias, wreaths, etc. So that we bring back those symbols of the holidays, the symbols of the various holidays, back into our schools. That we have age-appropriate lessons and activities that could accompany the recognitions of these various symbols. And our principals and teachers at each individual school can determine what that is and what that means to the building. Again, age-appropriate lessons to recognize the different traditions that occur. And number three, continue to recognize the other non-holiday celebrations that we do. We have American Heritage Month, Hispanic Heritage Month, Black History Month. We have multicultural family nights. We have those going on in our district now. We should continue to celebrate these and consider expanding, again, age-appropriate lessons. I guess at the end, my point is our students, again, are fortunate. They're very fortunate to be in a community with such great diversity. And we should be celebrating and taking advantage of that. So that's my recommendation to the board moving forward, that, again, in summary, we continue with these PBIS celebrations, but we continue to look at ways to recognize and expand and celebrate the multicultural community that we live in.
Questions from the board?
Well, I want to make a comment. I was pretty vocal on it the last time we talked about this, so I just want to say thanks for, the work you put into, I'll call it a compromise on my part, but I like it. I like your plan.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
I like your point as well. The notion that groups can organize their own parties in an after-school event is a good idea by and large. Thing that I'd like to see added to the plan is some sort of limitation in terms of a minimum number of folks that go to make up what could be called a group. If you organize along the line of religions, you can find religions that there's going to be 2 people in the city of Dekalb to practice. And I just wonder at the practicality of trying to do something for serving some very, very limited populations. As those populations grow and are welcome here, I'd like to see them go over a threshold and maybe have exactly the kinds of things that you're talking about. But where do we set the line? Where do we put the border?
Well, and my suggestion is that it's not within the school day that we have those specific celebrations. That would be left to the building level PTOs. And again, I think it's better left to them that in the school day, we're going to have the all-inclusive celebrations that are not secular, but then have the ability to still recognize the traditions of of the various groups that exist within our community, within our schools.
So a perfect example of what you're kind of asking, I get that you're going down a different path, but I kind of can answer this too. Like Jefferson, I keep before for Jay, let's just talk about 2 schools specifically that kind of promote what Jamie is saying and already doing what Jamie is stating. So they still have the PBIS celebration, but Jefferson PTO hosts a Jingles and Jammies. And it's really nice. I mean, and everyone comes, actually different people from different religions come to it. It doesn't have the whole Christmas party, but it's intended for Christmas. So they do Christmas caroling, they bring a blanket, they have hot cocoa, they make cookies. So they kind of already do what someone would do in a traditional holiday for Christmas, but they don't put that logo, they just have fun while celebrating and promoting what they already like to do during the holidays. Little John, I don't know what you guys called it, but it was like a winter wonderland, really fun. Oh my God, it was at night, and they had different stations in every room. I was in the cookie decorating station, and what I can say is they still did what they found to be important during Christmas, but promoted different aspects of it and made it educational. So it was a really nice experience, and I feel like Jamie's right. He's spot on with it, stating this is already happening. Maybe, I don't know about all the other schools, so I won't say it's happening there or not happening, but it's already happening. Jefferson hosts the multicultural, really nice, that if you all haven't been to it, should go. It's a really nice experience where people or students and parents get to kind of promote that diversity component that Jamie is talking about, as Jefferson has multiple religions, ethnicities, backgrounds. So they get to promote that. They have different restaurants, vendors, people come in, and students feel really, really proud to share a little bit about their heritage. So I feel like this is happening maybe at different levels in different buildings. So now they're just going to have like maybe a more clear picture of what can happen and should happen. But obviously it's going to look different no matter what, because Baby Brooks looks a little different from Jefferson. So it's still going to vary, but it's going to be left to what.
So it remains loose.
Not loose, more relevant to what the building. I don't know.
Does that get organized by cooperation between Jefferson officials and the PTO?
The Jingles and Jammies is
It is the PTO.
It's the PTO.
So that's PTO.
Yeah.
So it's really kind of it's
Right.
always evolving, always changing, things are happening. I'll open up another room for somebody else.
If they needed to, yeah.
If
If they wanted to, that
So
could happen.
I think that what you're saying there, Jamie, and I think if I'm hearing you correctly, Val, is saying these things are informal, inclusive, as long as they have an air of inclusiveness and welcoming, that it can relax and it can flow in its own direction. So I think that's an important part of it. You can over-organize that thing and it starts to get a little goofy.
And we have really good attendance at these functions. I know when we did it at Little John and I was there, it was almost hard to get in some of the rooms because they're just that well attended. Yeah.
And also it's what we're looking for. It's the thing that we are looking for with it is to create a community. We want to create that bond between parents and children and school families. So I think it's terrific.
Well, thank you, Jamie, for the update.
Yep.
Thank you.
Okay, next we have approval of Director of Athletics and Activities contract for Peter Goff. And this is an action item that the Board of Education approve the 2018-2019 Director of Athletics and Activities contract for Peter Goff as attached. Do we have a motion?
So moved.
Do we have a second? Okay. Discussion?
I know. I know.
Okay, roll call.
Jeff Albrecht,
Yes.
Gary Malett,
Yes.
Victoria Newport,
Yes.
Valerie Senior Hernandez,
Yes.
Rick Smith,
Yes.
Howard Solomon,
Yes.
Fred Davis.
Yes.
Okay.
Pete Golf is here. If I can introduce our new athletic director as of July 1, Mr. Peter Golf.
I'd just like to thank you talk about how your life can change. Well, this a week and a half, it's changed a lot. And I'm very humble. I'm very proud to be coming to Dekalb to lead the activities and athletics. So you will see a lot of me. I'm all over the place. I'll be at the things at the middle school, wherever. So very, very grateful and thank you very much.
Welcome.
Can I suggest something? Normally we do this for in recognition, but can we shake his hand and welcome him to this?
Do we have to? To the traditional holiday parties.
He's joking, they're friends.
Wait a minute.
It's a very important position.
You go first, Jamie. Pleasure to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Okay, next we have the approval of the coordinator contract for Nicole Maxwell. This is an action item that the Board of Education approve the 2018-2019 coordinator contract for Nicole Maxwell as attached.
And we need to amend on the contract that was posted, the salary was wrong. It was posted at 186, or excuse me, at 86. That's to be amended to 84,150.
Do this as two proposals, one to amend and then the second one to.
There can be a motion to accept as amended.
Do we have a motion to accept as amended?
So moved.
Second.
Discussion?
Yes. Okay, so, I had an issue with this when I looked at the agenda on Friday because I didn't feel that I had felt then that I didn't know enough about this. I have since found that we did an audit in 2015, in February 2015, that speaks to some of the questions that I had about this. In particular, what such a coordinator would do, and more particularly with respect to the audit from 2015, what was recommended by way of the audit that was done under a former student services director in 2015. And I still have questions about what the position will accomplish, but I think that the audit has helped me to understand the need. And so with some discussion with Jamie, I think I can see an easier way forward with this as a result of that, although I still have questions. So I wondered if any of the other board members had any concerns or questions about this.
I had a little bit of a concern in the sense that when this came up before us as an information item, it was subordinated to some other pressing issues that took 2 hours for us to do and discuss within that meeting. So we really didn't get a chance to talk about it. Procedurally, I think that we're shortchanging that particular aspect of it, the informational side. However, I did get a chance to talk to Superintendent Gray about this, and I have since come to the conclusion that this is something that is in keeping with that 2015 assessment, and I feel that it is something that can explain sufficiently to me as the priority of the position.
I actually want to thank Jamie. I actually honestly can say that it is a huge need, and, you know, I have heard really good things from several people about this person that was selected. So, you know, this is something really important for our district, and I wanted to, you know, really thank Jamie for prioritizing, as this is something that the entire district is going to benefit from. So I you know, I just want to thank him, and I think it's important.
Other comments?
One thing, we have a 200-day coordinator. How is that coordinated with the regular school year?
It's consistent with the other coordinator contracts.
Mayor Millat,
Yes.
Victoria DeFord,
Yes.
Valerie Pena Hernandez,
Yes.
Rick Smith,
Yes.
Howard Solomon,
Yes.
Fred Davis,
Yes.
Jeff Algren.
Yes.
I don't believe she is here tonight. I'll make sure she's at the next meeting.
Congratulations, Jared.
Congratulations. Okay, next we have the non-business consent agenda. This is an action item that the Board of Education approve the non-business consent agenda items A through I.
So moved.
A second?
Second.
Discussion? Any discussion? All right, roll call, please.
Valerie Pena Hernandez,
Yes.
Rick Smith,
Yes.
Howard Solomon,
Yes.
Fred Davis,
Yes.
Jeff Algren,
Yes.
Mayor Millat,
Yes.
Victoria DeFord.
Yes. We have the business consent agenda. This is an action item that the Board of Education approve the business consent agenda items A through D. Is there a motion?
Second.
Discussion? Roll call, please.
Rick Smith,
Yes.
Howard Solomon,
Yes.
Fred Davis,
Yes.
Jeff Algren,
Yes.
Mayor Millat,
Yes.
Victoria DeFord,
Yes.
Valerie Pena Hernandez.
Yes.
Next is business and finance. Request to purchase Chromebooks for Curriculum Technology Initiative and request for quote to lease one-to-one devices. This is an informational item and bail.
It is an informational item to go out to lease for the 120 equipment for next year. This is budgeted ready for the next budget cycle and has been already shown in the numbers you've seen previously. This is typically something that Cindy assists me with, but in her absence, I am up here to help out.
Questions?
Jeff, you have a question?
No, it's important. I was going to ask for clarification on something, but I remember that I looked it up and figured it out, so I'm good.
The overall number of one-to-one computers that we're using will be what? We're replacing some that are leaving and going with students or going?
Right. So we actually have had an increase in enrollment, so we have to take care of that in order to, make sure there's balance in the classroom and so on and so forth. But for grades 3 through 12, it's approximately 4,500, I want to say, about 4,500 or so devices. But then once you start adding in, placement cycles and stuff like that.
We're not replacing 4,500.
No. We're replacing
What are we?
1,500. So when we initially went out and did one-to-one for grades 3 through 12, there was a large purchase that was made of the Acer devices. And of that pool, we are short now because of the student population increases. So we have to have devices that fill in the gaps there, as well as taking some of those out of circulation that have reached basically the point of no return. So those we will bring back in, rehab, and then put into our Warner cycle.
We're looking at roughly the same prices as what we were.
Yeah, actually, we've had very good pricing and very competitive offers from both Dell and Lenovo. We're still working through some of that right now. But yes.
And I remember the question I had. The 607 is distributed over the 3-year lease, or what is that 607? What does that mean?
Yeah, so it would be amortized over the 3 to 4 year lease with a $1 buyout on the end, because we actually have the devices longer than 4 years. So once the device ends its rotation cycle, and then gets put into the loaner pool. And so that way, when a student breaks a device, they can go to the media center and get a device. That way, they can continue working with the curriculum, doing homework, those sort of things.
And that number, that 607, includes warranty, includes replacement, those sorts of issues.
Yeah, so this would include a 4-year accidental warranty. Before that was not offered. Before it was only 3-year accidental warranties we could go out for. Was all the manufacturers offered at the time. So we would have to stopgap for that 4th year and go to a third party in order to get that 4th year, which has been a bit of trouble for us in trying to source parts for some of these, especially at the beginning when not all school districts were going one-to-one, and there were a lot of options out there at the time. So depending on what school districts went with what, and the number of devices that were on market and in the gray market for repairs, then all of a sudden your pricing would fluctuate between vendors.
And that 4th year would be when it would be most needed, presumably.
Absolutely. I mean, the device is still in use and we need it to last those 4 years. So that can be awfully difficult.
Terrific. Thank you for working on it.
Okay, do we have a consensus to run this back as an action item at the next meeting?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ben.
Request for one-time increase to the technology budget for fiscal year 2018-19 to purchase data center equipment. This is information.
So this is a budget expansion. So when I was here last year, the estimate was approximately $400,000 to do this. That was because it was going to have to include storage. Our work with the Atlantic Cloud, and because of our one-to-one, we've been able to reduce our storage costs, and I'll put that for probably an additional 2 to 3 years. Because of that, we were able to drop it to approximately $200,000. But again, working with Dell, HP, Cisco for an entire year, we've been beating them up and begging them to help us. We're at the $120,000 range. In addition to this, I am asking that $50,000 on top of this become an annual rotation that is included. There would be a separate account that Cindy would help assist me with that would basically compound. So that way, 7 years down the line, which is our hope with this, is a 7-year ROI. And these are coming with 7-year warranties, so we will reach that ROI. Is that with that $50,000, we can then offset the future of having to come in front of the board and then do another budget expansion for something like storage or data center renewals. This also will help us with stuff like the AC units, the in-row cooling, plumbing, electrical, fire suppression. There's a lot that goes into the data center besides just ones and zeros. There's a lot of brick and mortar.
Questions?
Yes. Am I seeing that it's 120 then and the 50 then, so we're talking about a total of 170?
Yes, with the hope of just the $50,000 then being continuation in the following year.
Can you tell us anything about how other districts handle these kinds of expenses? Is this typical, or any feel for that at all?
Yeah, so dealing with IEDL, Illinois Technology Leaders, many other groups, COSIN, Typically, we put together a 5-year budget cycle, which I've done with Andrea and Cindy. And basically list out what those expenses are going to be, so that way, you know, the budget can then match the expenses that would be coming forward years, you know, ahead. And most of the time, the budget can be adjusted in order to fit needs such as this. But going back to when the high school was built, that's when the data center was given. And there's never been budgetary dollars to then continue to be able to keep the equipment running and to then purchase future equipment. So a rotation cycle has never existed for the equipment. So what I'm trying to do here is get us on the right track, get us a 7-year ROI, and have a rotation cycle, so that way there isn't this.
The process sounds good. I was just thinking of, because at least for most of us, this is fairly new and trying to understand budget and tech. And I guess we're different because we do have line on cloud here and other districts do not, or many other districts do not.
We're very fortunate with that partnership, which we hope to continue.
But as far as rollout to the number of students that we've done, you know, how do our costs look as compared to any other large unit district, you know, that's doing the kind of same thing? Or is
Well,
there?
we've done very well. I mean, in talking to medium to larger size WUDA districts, we're running enterprise class equipment at a dollar value that
Yeah. I've noticed over the years, I mean, it's been years now, several years at least, you know, that we have gotten some great deals as compared to what it could have cost.
it takes a full year. I mean, this took a full year to get to this price point.
Started at 400 plus.
Yes, and through our work with the Line Dekalb consortium, and because of, I mean, quite honestly, because we've gone one-to-one, we create almost 4 terabytes worth of data every 6 months. So if you think of 4 terabytes of data, I mean, so 8 terabytes every single year reoccurring, that's a lot of storage that we simply don't have, nor does anyone else, which is why a lot of districts are going down that path of one-to-one, whether it's with Google or Microsoft. But.
Okay, thank you.
Great job with this. I know you do a lot of work on it.
Thank you.
Do we have a consensus to bring this back to the next item?
Yeah.
Thanks, Tom.
Thank you very much for that, and it represents a great deal of work.
Next, we have new business and administration. Approval to begin benefit broker consultant contract development, and this is an action item. That the Board of Education grant approval for administration to begin contract development with DLR Insurance for benefit broker consultant services. Do we have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
We just wanted to speak a little to the process. Ben has really spearheaded this process with the selection of the new broker. And we took some additional steps through this process and really thoroughly vetted the submissions we got from the RFP. We've included the insurance committee, you know, in that process, and an administrative team internally that really took, you know, thorough examination of those RFPs that were submitted, and several meetings with various brokers, made it to the final round and different platform demos. And so I just want to applaud Ben for his work and collaboration on that. He did a great job, and we're recommending the DLR Insurance the broker that we began to draft that contract, bring that to the makers for information.
And we do have Doug here with us today. Do you guys have any questions, Doug, from DLR?
Questions?
Yeah, Doug, I have a question, and I think Sarah and Ben filled me in on this, but I just want to ask you directly. One of the great advantages that I see in you as our potential vendor for this is a local office. And I know when you presented to us at the insurance committee 2 times back, that you said you're going to open an office right in the area somewhere. So is that still the case? That's my concern.
Yes, we will definitely maintain an office.
Thank you.
Well, I want to mention that both Carrie's been to the additional meeting. I was not there, unfortunately. I had another commitment, but we were there for the presentation. It was very thorough, and our choice or the choice that you made, we have, there are a great many advantages to it that you guys reviewed in detail, but I was impressed with the portfolio of current clients that you have. And I too, like Carrie, really like the concept that you're going to be putting in an office that to service us in this, and then I'm sure expand business in the area.
Victoria, I just want to say to the board that Ben and Sarah have done quite a bit of work on this. The point where all three vendors came to us, to the insurance committee, there was a great deal of information. All three companies brought a good presentation to us, and I think it was probably not easy for you two and your staff to make the decision that you come to, after sorting through the various components of each offer from coming back from the RP. So good job, and thank you on behalf of the board.
Roll call?
Howard Solomon,
Yes.
Fred Davis,
Yes.
Jeff Albrecht,
Yes.
Karen Malat,
Yes.
Victoria Newport,
Yes.
Valerie Pena Hernandez,
Yes.
Rick Smith.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, we have approval of agreement with Two Rivers Head Start Agency. This is an action item. That the Board of Education, this is action and information. The Board of Education approved a cooperative agreement with Two Rivers Head Start Agency to identify the pre-kindergarten children requiring specialized services. Do we have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
I just wanted to tell you the Federal Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, that's IDEA, requires that districts collaborate with their community agencies who serve children 3 to 21 years old to identify and then serve the children with specialized needs. This process is called our Child Find responsibilities. This annual agreement that you see with Three Rivers Head Start is responding to that requirement.
So basically, this is something that's an annual requirement that we approve an agreement, and obviously, as Christy pointed out, part of the federal IDEA Act.
Okay. Any other questions or discussion? All right, roll call, please.
Fred Davis,
Yes.
Yes.
Karen Malat,
Yes.
Victoria Newport,
Yes.
Valerie Pena Hernandez,
Yes.
Rick Smith,
Yes.
Howard Solomon.
Yes.
Thanks, Christie.
Sure. Thank you.
Next, we have changing how we meet the needs of our middle school ELA students. This is an action item. That the Board of Education approved the restructuring of English language arts at the middle school level, replacing the advanced ELA students into the regular ELA classes. Do we have a motion?
So moved. Second.
Discussion? Roll call, please.
Jeff Albrecht,
No.
Karen Malat,
Yes.
Victoria Newport,
Yes.
Valerie Pena Hernandez,
Yes.
Rick Smith,
Yes.
Howard Solomon,
Yes.
Fred Davis.
Yes.
Next is approval of materials adoption proposal for AP European History. This is an action item. That the Board of Education approve the adoption and purchase of Western Civilization since 1300 AP edition, 10th Street edition for the upcoming 2018-2019 school year as was presented. Do we have a motion?
So moved.
Discussion? Roll call, please.
Karen Malat,
Yes.
Victoria Newport,
Yes.
Valerie Pena Hernandez,
Yes.
Rick Smith,
Yes.
Howard Solomon,
Yes.
Fred Davis,
Yes.
Jeff Albrecht.
Yes.
Next, we have approval of materials adoption proposal for pre-calculus. This is an action item. That the board approve the selection and purchase of pre-calculus 2016 published by Glencoe McGraw-Hill for the upcoming 2018-2019 school year as was presented. Do we have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Discussion? Roll call, please.
Valerie Pena Hernandez,
Yes.
Rick Smith,
Yes.
Howard Solomon,
Yes.
Fred Davis,
Yes.
Jeff Albrecht,
Yes.
Karen Malat,
Yes.
Victoria Newport.
Yes. Next is materials adoption proposal for AP Biology. This is an action item. That the school board approve the adoption and purchase of Campbell Biology for the upcoming 2018-2019 school year. Do we have a motion?
Second.
Discussion?
Yeah. I've been quiet for a while.
I was gonna say.
Been on a roll.
If this book had existed when I was in high school, I might have become a biologist. It's a really nice book.
Oh, you're never too old to start all over.
Somebody's texts are fantastic.
I want to add that I also, as a teacher, I was very impressed with this and the backup material. I mean, it's just such an array of material and education material that it just seemed, it was very, very impressive. Thank you very much.
You might have to tell Mrs. Johnson there's a new student in this class.
Probably more than one place.
Okay.
Roll call. Rick Smith.
Yes.
Howard Solomon.
Yes.
Ray Davis.
Yes.
Jeff Albrecht.
Yes.
Mary Malett.
Yes.
Victoria Newport.
Yes.
And Valerie Pinkerton.
Next, we have the intergovernmental agreement with the city of Dekalb for school and municipal cooperation. This is an action item. That the Board of Education approve the intergovernmental agreement between Dekalb Custodial District 428 and City of Dekalb in the best interest of all parties. Do you have a motion?
So moved.
Discussion?
I would like for, never mind, no need for
No
Don.
need.
I was gonna say for the record, to give an idea of what this is, just a synopsis, but no need particularly.
Any other discussion?
I could read it.
It's an extensive agreement, you know. and-
It is.
And I think everyone that worked on it, Jamie and the people at the city of DeKalb,
And Tammy and
and
Cindy.
everybody here.
And much needed, much needed. We really need, we're in a bag race together. We definitely need that cooperation.
It's a good thing.
All right. So, roll call.
Howard Solomon.
Yes.
Ray Davis.
Yes.
Jeff Albrecht.
Yes.
Mary Malett.
Yes.
Victoria Newport.
Yes.
Valerie Pinkerton.
Yes.
Rick Smith.
Yes.
Thanks for putting that in.
The meeting will be adjourned. All in
Yes.
favor?
Aye.
Aye.